The final large section of the book of Jeremiah, his oracles against the nations in 45 to 51, is bracketed by two brothers. We got Baruch, the son of Neriah, and Seraiah, the son of Neriah. Look at how this is designed. Take a look at these brackets here in the large section at the end. So we have a word from Jeremiah to Baruch. Who is he? He's the son of Neriah, his scribe. And then at the end of this section, the last little bit of chapter 51, we have a word to Seraiah, who is the son of Neriah. Are these the same guys? I'm thinking probably yes, thanks to chapter 32, verse 12, where it's confirmed that Baruch, the son of Neriah, is the grandson of Messiah. I mean, look at that. Isn't that crazy? 5 little verses here at the beginning. Chapter 45 is only 5 verses, and then 6 little verses here at the end of chapter 51. And they're just kind of, sitting here as the bun of a little oracles against the nation hamburger. Yeah, the design is just so intentional. I think these little tiny details, there are so many of them throughout the Hebrew Bible, are just evidence to the fact that this is a purposeful and intentional design. So what's going on in each of these, the bun of the hamburger, you may say? Well, in chapter 45, Baruch is just sitting there with his pen in hand and he's writing away because Jeremiah is dictating his oracles and Baruch is writing them down. Well, Yahweh is going to interrupt this whole process with a word of the Lord that comes to Jeremiah. It's interesting how it gives us this window into what it was like to receive a word of the Lord. Evidently, it could interrupt a dictation process. And this word of the Lord is not for the nations, it's not for Judah, but rather it's for Baruch himself. Yahweh gives a word to Jeremiah, which he must speak to his scribe, because evidently, poor Baruch, I mean, he had a tough job, let's admit it. And in chapter 45, we're told that he does his own laments. He's going to say in chapter 45, woe is me, for Yahweh has added sorrow to my pain. Evidently, Baruch needed a little bit of encouragement, and Yahweh is not past giving this guy Baruch some encouragement. So he's going to say, I will protect you. I promise to protect you, Baruch. I will give your life as a prize for war wherever you go. Well, Baruch, is going to go to Egypt with Jeremiah. And Seraiah, he is going to go to Babylon. So these final 6 verses, we're told that Jeremiah, he wrote down all of his oracles against Babylon, and he gives them to Seraiah, brother of Baruch, and says, all right, Seraiah, I want you to read these oracles in Babylon. Good luck with that. Have fun. It's a pretty rough life to be a prophet or someone who's a friend of a prophet or a scribe of a prophet. So consider your life choices when you're picking a career. Well, this is situated right after, like we said, the oracles against the nations, which is God's primarily his judgment, although there's restoration sprinkled in there too. Judgment against these nations, the neighbors of Judah, which will be carried out by God's hammer. And his hammer, which he smashes everyone with, is Babylon. But we're told in these chapters 50 to 51 that Babylon himself, the hammer, is going to get smashed as well. Well, Jeremiah is not the only one who has a oracles against the nations section in his prophetic literature. Isaiah, of course, has one as well. It's located in chapters 13 to 23 of his book. And those chapters, you remember, are tied historically to the backdrop of his own day. Of course, the backdrop of Isaiah's day is Assyria's domination of the whole arena. Well, these oracles against the nation are tied to the historical backdrop of Jeremiah's day, which is the expansion of the empire of Babylon. For example, take the first of these oracles against the nations. In chapter 46, there's an oracle concerning Egypt. Now, do you remember, back from our first lecture, how Josiah died? King Josiah. Pharaoh Necho was coming up from the south to support the fading army of Assyria at Carchemish. And then Josiah tries to stop him, tries to intercept him, and he dies. Pharaoh Necho continues up, and there is a conflict with the army of Babylon at Carchemish. Well, we read chapter 46 and we see that God wasn't too fond of that move by Egypt. Let's take a look. All right, we can get rid of you. Let's jump to the oracles against the nations, specifically the word about Egypt. Now look how specific we are, and it's just linking to that situation that we learned about earlier. Considering what specifically? Considering the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, by the river Euphrates at Carchemish, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, defeated them. I mean, this is exactly what is described uh, in history with that event at the Battle of Carchemish. Well, consider a couple of other oracles, back-to-back oracles against Moab, chapter 48, and against Ammon in chapter 49. Now, the background for those oracles can be found in 2 Kings 24. Of course, the last two chapters of 2 Kings are going to relate to these final kings of Judah. But let's read and look for Moab and Ammon. Ooh, I found them. In his days, Nebuchadnezzar came up against Judah because it rebelled against him. And then, look at this. This is wild. Yahweh sent against Jehoiakim, against Judah, bands of Chaldeans, that is the Babylonians, and bands, that is marauding groups of Moabites and Ammonites as well, sent to Judah to destroy them, according to the word of the Lord spoken by his servants, the prophets. Ooh, Jeremiah. Now, isn't that fascinating how God, in his sovereignty over all events and over all of history, he can use nations like Babylon, the Chaldeans, like Moab, like Ammon, as his rods of discipline against a sinful Judah. But then he will punish those very same nations for their cruelty to Judah. Now, this is not like God is forcing Moab and Ammon to attack Judah. It's not like Moab's like, I just want to be your friend, Judah. Can't we be pals? And then God's like, no, you will attack Judah. No, it's not like that at all. Moab and Ammon, through their own sinful free will choices, wanted to take advantage of Judah's rebellion against Babylon and gobble up some of their land in the north. That's what 2 Kings tells us they did. However, God's ultimate purpose for all nations is that they would come to his throne in Jerusalem and worship before him. You see, Jeremiah is a prophet to the nations, both to pluck up, tear down, destroy, and overthrow, but also to build and to plant. And that's why it will say in these chapters 46 to 49 that in the latter days, Yahweh will restore the fortunes. He will restore the captivity of Egypt, of Moab, of Ammon, of Elam. He will restore their fortunes as well. And then we're given this beautiful picture of the nations coming up to Jerusalem in chapter 3. Take a look at this. Jeremiah doesn't have a whole lot to say about Zion and its restoration. Oh, we want to go to Jeremiah. Not like Isaiah does, but look at this. At that time, Jerusalem will be called the throne of Yahweh, and all nations will gather to Yahweh at his throne in Jerusalem, to his presence there, and they will no longer follow their stubborn heart. Isn't that beautiful? Love that. However, it does not say that about Babylon. Babylon's fortunes will not be restored. You see, Babylon is God's hammer, and that hammer, it's going to be crushed. Let's take a look at this. Now we're going to move to 50 to 51. Let's start with 51, verse 20. You, Babylon, you are my hammer. You are my weapon of war. With you, I break nations in pieces. I destroy kingdoms. I break the horse and its rider. But I will repay Babylon and the inhabitants of Chaldea for all the evil that you have done. Now let's look down. Let's jump now to chapter 50, verse 39. Look at this destruction of Babylon that's described. Wild beasts will dwell with hyenas in Babylon. Ostriches will dwell in Babylon. That's because no people are there. It's completely empty. And never again will it have people or inhabitants for all generations. Just like God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, so no man will dwell in Babylon again. Now that's kind of curious because that day of destruction with ostriches, taking up residence in Babylon, that never happened historically. Babylon was always always inhabited. There's always people in it. Historically, Babylon's final king, their last king, Nabonidus, he was a worthless king, totally useless. And under his reign, the kingdom would crumble around him. And the person who conquered Babylon, Cyrus, king of Persia, basically just walks right into the city of Babylon. And history tells us that he basically assumed control of the city as a liberator of an oppressed people. That's what we read. So that doesn't really sound like, it's level to the ground and ostriches are laying their eggs among the rubble. That doesn't really seem to make sense. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can understand these oracles of complete annihilation of Babylon. Either Jeremiah is just using kind of like elevated, symbolic, rhetorical language to describe this kind of mild transition in power. So that's one possibility. It's just this elevated language. Or perhaps Jeremiah has two Babylons in mind. Consider this. Jeremiah is quoted in the New Testament about 40 times. And many of those quotations are located in Revelation chapter 17 and 18, which describes the destruction of eschatological Babylon, where it says, fallen, fallen is Babylon. Babylon, the prostitute of all nations. Well, there is a feature in Old Testament prophecy which occasionally will merge near prophecy with far prophecy. It will bring them together side by side. So take this, for example. In Zechariah 9:9, it says, behold, your king is coming to you. Humble is he and riding on a donkey. Well, that was accomplished in the life of Jesus. But then the very next verse, Zechariah 9:10, says that his reign will be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. That did not happen with the reign, with the coming of Jesus at his first coming. It's going to happen with his second coming. And that's because eschatological prophecy, specifically this restoration content, it's kind of like a mountain range. I'm sure you've heard this metaphor before, where you look at a mountain range, here's my mountains, and it kind of looks like they're all at the same location. We got this mountain, that mountain, this mountain. They all look like they're kind of together. But there could be hundreds of miles between this mountain and this other mountain. And it all just kind of looks like they're one picture, one portrait. Well, just as there are potentially hundreds of miles between these mountains, so there may be thousands of years between elements of these poems of restoration and of judgment, especially when eschatological content is potentially in view. And I think that this perspective is strengthened by the fact that there are many oracles of restoration, which are kind of sprinkled throughout these chapters, 50 and 51. Let's take a look at one of them, chapter 50, verse 20. All right, let's go up to verse 20. So here we are. In those days, that is the time when Babylon will be destroyed, in those days, declares the Lord, iniquity will be sought in Israel. Where is iniquity? Where is sin? I'm looking for it. But they will find none. There'll be no sin in Judah anymore. It'll be completely gone and eradicated in those days, in the time when Babylon will fall. Well, let's transition now to our last chapter of the book, the epilogue, chapter 52. And honestly, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Here we have 30 verses just tacked on to the end of the book, which recalls the destruction of Jerusalem, which we basically got word for word in chapter 39. Destruction of Jerusalem, chapter 39, and in 52, 1 to 30. Take a look at this chart, which places these two chapters side by side, and you'll see how similar they are. All right, chart. So here we are, the epilogue, chapter 52, the destruction of Jerusalem again. In chapter 39, we read that this took place in the 9th year of King Zedekiah. In the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city. Jump to 52, in the 9th year, 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city. And then, in the 11th year of Zedekiah, on the 4th month, there was a breach in the city. Jump to 52, on the 11th year of King Zedekiah, 9th day, 4th month, a breach was made in the city. These are just kind of very similar accounts, just minor changes made between them. And then chapter 39 is going to continue into 40 and 41 and follow the remnant that remained in Judah. But then the rest of chapter 52 will follow the exiles to Babylon. But why? Why this repetition? Well, the best I can tell, this section, the first half of the epilogue, is here to vindicate Jeremiah as a true prophet compared to the false prophets that we read about in his conflict with the prophets in this previous section. You see, Hananiah and Shemaiah, they said that the people and the vessels which were carried off into exile in Babylon, they will come back soon. But the opposite took place. We read in Jeremiah 51 to 30 that exiles and temple vessels did not come back, but rather more exiles and more temple vessels were taken to Babylon. I think that that point is certainly emphasized. However, if Jeremiah's oracles of judgment came to pass, and they're proven here in chapter 52, that means also that his oracles of restoration, they will come to pass as well. And we're given one final affirmation of that fact in the final 4 verses of the book, 31 to 34, where we are promised that the death of Zedekiah will not end our hope that a future son of David will sit on a throne in Jerusalem over all nations forever. That's because Jehoiachin, who happens to be Zedekiah's nephew, he's still alive in Babylon. And we're, just launched 37 years into the future after the destruction of Jerusalem, launched into the future here where Jehoiachin is released from prison and he is exalted in Babylon. And that gives us hope that there can be another son of David who also will be exalted and given a name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord of the reunited Israel and Judah, who will no longer chase empty cisterns which can hold no water, but rather they will hold fast to Yahweh with a full heart, a heart which is no longer engraved with sin, but rather a heart which is engraved with the Torah of Yahweh.